Support for Consider This is provided by
There's a new place for senior care with daily laundry service. A place with a day spa. A place where seniors get the care they need in the comfort of home. Home Instead Senior Care.
from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, flood management. Joining us to talk more about it is Randall Boehm, chairman of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers National Non-Structural Floodproofing Committee. That's quite a title there, Randall.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Thank you very much for being here and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Let's start off by having you explain how you define the Army Corps of Engineers.
There's a long history. The Corps of Engineers dates back to the 1770s, actually, when the first Chief of Engineers was assigned with the military, a function with the Department of Army. Over the years, probably in 1824, I believe, if I know the history on this, they actually started working more closely with projects, canals, riverways, and so forth like that. Over the years, our mission has grown more, and most people are familiar probably with dams and levees being most of our tools that we work with, but we have other tools that we're starting to utilize quite a bit now for flood risk management.
Okay, and how were you introduced to this realm?
Myself, actually my grandfather back in 1968 took me on a little hike along the Missouri River, and he told me that when he was a young man in the early 19-teens, that he had worked with the Department of Army and Army Corps of Engineers on channel stabilization projects along the Missouri River. From that point on, I was 10 years old, I had an interest in the rivers. And I followed that, and with luck, I was able to come on board with the Corps of Engineers in 1985, and I have 32 years as an engineer with the Corps of Engineers now.
Wow. In your history, your 30-plus history, what has been the most unimaginable thing that you have encountered from a flooding perspective?
It's probably because I do function, even though I work out of Omaha, I function nationally for our agency, and I've seen such devastating floods, just like what we saw on the Hurricane Irma and Harvey preview there. But I've seen whenever there's death, fatalities associated with it, and it's just unimaginable to me when people put themselves in such a predicament to end up drowning. I even, one thing that comes to mind locally that occurred back in the 1990s is that we were doing a little bit of a recon on a flood event that was occurring, and a colleague and I stopped to check out this community that was flooding. I don't know why, but we saw a home, and we went up to check to see if anybody was in the house that was flooding. There was about 2 foot of water in this old house. Sure enough, there was a very elderly woman that was inside laying in her bed with floodwaters all around her, and we carried her out of there, took her over to a local church, and none of the citizens were even aware that she was in trouble, and we're not even sure how she would have escaped from that house. So just from small things like that, it can impact anybody. It doesn't have to be a national event. It could be just a small local flood event that can put you in harm's way.
So, Randall, what must a person who's walking in your shoes be like? What types of, that's pretty startling. That takes a special person to be able to be open to what you may or may not find. Talk a little bit about maybe even training that entails.
It's a lot of training. In fact, most of us have a professional background. Myself, I'm an engineer. So we work with engineers, architects, economists, cultural research folks, and everything. But for myself, going through school, I did a lot of water resource computer modeling, became very familiar, and that led into working along the rivers and identifying the floodplains that you see FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, produces or publishes those maps. But it was all that training. And then actually in the Great Flood of 1993, it was when I was really introduced to flooding along the Missouri River then.
Wow, and what about the human aspect though? I mean, we're talking from an engineer standpoint, technically, right? But from a human standpoint, you've got to be prepared for just about anything.
You do. Yeah, it's stressful. It's extremely stressful. It's stressful on the citizens that are being flooded, whether it's imminent flooding or if the flooding's occurring. You're working with local officials that are wearing numerous hats in their jobs, and they're trying to do the best job that they can for the community. So if anything, there's a lot of stress associated with it. But I'll tell you what, we have such good people in our agency that go out of their way to really try to help and support during these type of disasters.
Of course, folks in Texas and Florida, extremely grateful for people like you right now. 2 of the worst hurricanes to date hitting that area with flooding, but from different causes, right? Talk to us a little bit about that as we put up some video of Irma.
Okay. With Irma, and the one thing that we can do in our country that other smaller countries, less developed countries cannot do, we can track these storms very well. And so we're able to get out in front of these storms. And it's difficult with the modeling. Sometimes you see on the Weather Channel, they'll talk about the spaghetti models and they'll show the different paths. But with the hurricanes, that's the worst type of flooding that we'll have because wind and heavy rains are associated with it. And when they come in, it's such an intense downpour, there's always flooding associated with it. And the fact that you're in a coastal area, you're going to have tides associated. So you get that water that's being pushed in by the ocean into these coastal communities.
Is it common to see the types of storms we have seen back to back in Harvey and Irma?
It's not common. I would say, you could look at the probability of the occurrence of it, and you would say that, maybe it's not that common. But what we've been hearing in recent years, whether you believe in climate change and sea level rise, is that our oceans are warming up, and these hurricanes get their energy from the heat that comes off the oceans. So it's not that big of a surprise to have multiple hurricanes in the same season, but the thing is to have 2 massive storm events like this hit the United States, that's not very typical.
Well, if this is something that may become not more common, but just not surprising, right? Let's talk nationally here. What should people be most aware of then? You don't want to obviously alarm folks, but to make them aware, what types of things could they be doing or looking for at this point?
I think it's almost a paradigm in the way that we have developed our country in the coastal areas, going back, to the early days of settlements and so forth. We've always been close to the water, and I think we're going to have to change that a little bit. Really consider the risk that's associated with living that close to some areas of the ocean and some of our major river systems across the United States. We have tools. There's things that, in fact, that I do as the chairman of this national committee. We look at what we call non-structural techniques. We look at things like elevating structures, relocating structures if they're in a high hazard area. Let's move them out of there. We look at flood proofing. We try to prevent water from going into structures. And then we have our traditional tools of levees and berms and dams that also come into play.
That kind of thing doesn't just happen overnight. And again, we're talking about human beings here. Some folks obviously making a concerted effort to live where they live. So how would you approach that big picture, getting people to actually uproot themselves and go someplace else?
I think from what I heard in the aftermath of these 2 storms, when they were interviewing the television networks were down there with the survivors, so many of them were saying that they would never go through this again. Now that's interesting because with Hurricane Irma that hit the Florida coast, they had evacuation orders for everybody and to get out of there, and a lot of residents stayed behind because they thought it wouldn't be that severe of a storm. Now they've learned otherwise. Now down in Texas coast with Hurricane Harvey, it was more of a voluntary type of evacuation process. So I think as a nation, we're going to look at the results of both of those hurricane events, the devastation from them, and then the pre-planning on how were we able to evacuate our population, where did we move the population, and did we have time to do that. So I think with every disaster that we face, we'll take a step forward in the learning process so that next time around, hopefully it'll go a little bit more smoothly.
So in the spirit of that learning, we go back, you had mentioned the Great Flood of 1993. Let's go back in time and kind of refresh our viewers' memory on that as we put up a few photographs here. Just recap that if you would.
Okay, for 1993, that was a major flood event that started, basically it was the year before. We had cool temperatures, we had a lot of rainfall. The ground became very saturated. It couldn't hold any more runoff. So it was not due to a hurricane like we're seeing on TV to the coastal areas. This, for us, was due to rainfall events, intense rainfall events. If you recall, the Mississippi River was flooding. Des Moines, Iowa, their water treatment plant went out of operation, and that was on the news all the time with National Guard trying to sandbag it. Well, eventually, we started getting hit in our area with massive rainfall. There's thunderstorm events, usually early to late evening, and so much rain was coming. Well, pretty soon, all these tributary streams, these smaller streams that flow into the Missouri River, were flowing full, and it put a lot of pressure on our levee system on the Missouri River. So that was a major flood event for both the Mississippi and the Missouri River. Very costly event.
Yeah, and I want to ask specifically how Omaha, St. Louis, and Kansas City fared, and why they fared the way they did.
Excellent questions. I think with Omaha, we responded, and we're very lucky that we were not hit in the upper basin. Now with the Omaha being located along the Missouri River, our Omaha District Corps of Engineers covers 770,000 square miles of drainage basin on the Missouri River. Massive. We're the largest land mass organization for the Corps of Engineers, not the largest population. But we are lucky because in the fact that this flooding occurred farther downstream. It was not up into the upper basin that affected our dams like it did in 2011 on that flood event. It was a little bit different character. A lot of flooding came into the system downstream of Omaha. The Platte River system was flooding. In Kansas City, they also have a number of dams and reservoirs that they can regulate. And watching the occurrence of the flooding on the river, they were able to hold back water in the reservoirs to make room for these floodwaters that were entering the Missouri River. Now, unfortunately for St. Louis and some of the suburbs in that area, they not only had the Missouri River, but they also had the Mississippi River that was at flood stage, and a lot of devastation from the confluence of the Missouri River, Mississippi, all the way down through New Orleans to the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow. Okay, so present day, well, let me back up. So maybe greatest lesson you learned from that particular event?
I thought that would be the greatest, largest event that I would ever see, and I don't believe so. I think as we go through time here, for whatever reason, what we're seeing, even if it's more localized, we're seeing communities that have extremely intense rainfall events that will cause flooding. If I can even mention, last fall, Baton Rouge, Louisiana area had extremely high amounts of rainfall, I think in excess of over 20 inches of rain, unheard of. Over 97,000 residential structures were flooded, and about 60% of those, I think, were located outside of any floodplain mapping. So it affected people that weren't even aware they were at a flood risk.
Wow. So next question, present day Nebraska. What factors that we know of play into the flooding here?
I think for us, across our state, and we have a variety of different types of watersheds. We have the Platte River, major river system across the state of Nebraska. It has inflows that come out from Colorado and Wyoming, so we're always watching the snowpack in those areas. When that snow starts to melt and comes across into the Platte River, and I think we're all very familiar with the warnings that we look at in the springtime when there could be ice jam flooding on the Platte River. The Platte flows so shallowly and slowly that it'll freeze over in cold temperatures in the wintertime, and then when the snow starts to melt off the farmland, ranch land, and everything, and it comes into the Platte River system, that's where we have the major concern. Now, other rivers like the Missouri and some of our other smaller tribs, the Republican, even the Papillion Creek system that we have throughout the Omaha area here, Wood River out near Grand Island, we're looking at probably rainfall flooding from that, just intense heavy rainfall that can come into the system. It exceeds the capacity of the channel, and the water will go out of channel, and that's where we see the damage occur then.
Wow, so if we're thinking statewide, and we're kind of trying to paint a picture here, what areas, specific areas, towns, whatever the case may be, would be most vulnerable? Would you consider to be most vulnerable?
It's difficult. We have, the Corps of Engineers, over the years, we partnered with state agencies like the Department of Natural Resources, fantastic operation that they have there. We partnered with communities. So when a flood event does occur, we will, when asked, partner with a community and state agencies, and we'll look at that flood threat. The thing is, if there's a known flood threat, if for instance, if the 100-year flood has been mapped out by FEMA and they know that some of those floodwaters can get into a community, we will partner and we'll look at what we can do to help protect the citizens there. So I can't say that there's any one location has a higher vulnerability than another. I think it's all based on probably the history of flooding and what communities have gone through.
Okay, and you mentioned or made reference to some of the organizations with whom you work. Outline those a little bit more for us in terms of when we encounter this experience, who might be involved in helping with the cleanup, or even with the warnings, whatever the case may be. Talk about that whole collaborative effort there, Randall.
That's great. In fact, there's a program that was initiated by the Corps of Engineers a few years ago called the Silver Jackets program. Every state has a statewide program stood up. Nebraska has a very, very good Silver Jackets program. The lead state agency on that is the Department of Natural Resources. The Nebraska Emergency Management Agency is another very good partner on that. And then you have the federal agencies like the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Geological Survey, you have Bureau of Reclamation, and FEMA. And we all come together several times a year at the state's request, and we look at what their high priority needs are for flood risk management throughout the state. And that's where we try to, in a collaborative effort, bring our resources together to see if we can respond to some of those needs. And sometimes it's the Corps of Engineers that has a program and the resources. Other times it could be FEMA or the USGS that has a program that could be utilized.
So what tends to be the most commonly asked question, or maybe the greatest area of concern? So when you're all coming around the table there, someone obviously opens that meeting with some statement, maybe it's current news, whatever the case may be, but what kind of communication is taking place in that room to make sure, I mean, this is a pretty big deal. You're a lot of agencies coming together to make sure that when the time is there, that you are all doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done.
That's great. In fact, I think when we come together when there's not a flood disaster, and it gives us an opportunity to plan more, we've done a number of workshops where the agencies have participated together. So across the state, we've worked hand in hand on presenting information to state and local officials just to help them in their emergency preparedness planning mode, so that when an event does hit, the communities know how to respond, the state knows how to respond, and the federal agencies know how to interact then also and provide not only technical services from our technical folks like engineers and so forth, but we also provide pumps and sandbags and other equipment to flood fight when there's the opportunity.
Well, and obviously, as within any organization, you have great people. It's even better when they elect to stay. You said at the beginning of the program you've been with the Corps for 30 plus years. Is that typical? I mean, are you finding that there's little turnover, or are people coming and going in this particular industry like so many others?
Well, they come and go, but we have 37,000 employees nationwide within our agency, and we have active military as well as civilian. In the Omaha area, just within our building, we have about 850 employees. And then for our district that covers the 770,000 square miles, we have about 1,275 employees located in project offices as well as the 850 in Omaha. We have enough turnover, I think, occurs that you have people that are like me that have been there for years,
Right.
and then you have newer ones. So it's just great because the newer engineers that come on board are bringing the latest and greatest technology with them from college, and it's helping, and we utilize everyone. Another thing that happens that I think is a benefit to all of us is that when there is turnover, sometimes you'll see an engineer or a colleague go to another federal agency, or they may even go to a private sector, and we still are in communication with those folks. So it's not like once you lose a person, they're gone completely. We run into each other a lot of times, and we're still working some of the same flood issues.
Okay. Behind the scenes, so let's bring it kind of all full circle here. Map out an event for us. So we have the flood warning. So you guys are saying, hey, this could possibly happen here. Just kind of walk us through what happens, who calls who, and how does that whole chain of command work so that we are being as proactive as we can possibly be given an event.
Okay. Probably the worst case scenario that I'm reminded of are those severe thunderstorms that occur in the summertime, and you know it's building up, and you can just tell. You have a feeling that it's going to be severe. You don't know where it's going to hit, but we have enough communities that we see it happen annually, and if not more soon than that. But we track the storms. So through the National Weather Service, through our agency, we have meteorologists on board with us. We do a great job of tracking these storms, and we try to identify how much rainfall can come out of them. Unfortunately for us, it seems like most of our rainfall occurs overnight. It'd be nice if the storms lit up the sky in the morning, but most of it occurs overnight. But when we're tracking these in advance, we're putting teams together, and we're identifying where the rainfall is going to occur, how much it's going to occur. We're on the phone working with the state, with the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency and other agencies. We're trying to pull our resources together to respond the best way we can. Now, if there's a levee system there that maybe the Corps of Engineers have previously built, we have concerns because there's a federal investment in that. So we go out and we try to ensure that those levees aren't going to fail. Of course, if you have a certain amount of rainfall event, maybe it's beyond the capacity of that levee and they could overtop. But mostly, we'll work with those communities that have the levees, and then we also try to provide technical assistance to areas that don't have any type of project, whether it's a dam or a levee.
Okay, let's change gears in just the final minutes we have remaining and go residential for a second.
Yep.
Right, so those floodplains, I'm a prospective home buyer and I find out that this house that I really want is in a floodplain. What does that mean exactly?
It's what we're doing and what FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has been tasked with since I think 1968 is to develop and publish floodplain maps. So what they're looking at, and generally everyone goes by the 100-year flood map, and it's actually a flood that has a 1% occurrence of occurring in any year. But we refer to it traditionally as the 100-year floodplain boundary. Whether you're considering buying a new home or you have an existing home, you really need to look through some resources. The Corps of Engineers is a resource. You can go to the internet, you could do a search engine view, or using something like Google to type in FEMA floodplain maps. It'll come up with a website. You can actually type in your address, a map will populate, and you can identify whether your house that you live in or the one that you want to purchase is located in a floodplain. But also, there's so many other resources. The communities provide a lot of this good information. Within the state of Nebraska, we also have the natural resource districts. I would also recommend going to those folks. They can provide some very good information.
Okay, so about a minute or so. Insurance, flood insurance. Educate us about flood insurance, Randall.
Well, it's something that the Corps of Engineers doesn't get highly involved with, but I'll tell you what, we do advocate for it. I think from what we've been seeing in recent years, the amount of devastation occurring from flooding, you really, if you're in a flood hazard area, and even if you're outside of what they would consider that 100-year flood boundary, but you're close to it, I would say purchase flood insurance and carry it, because it's too devastating on a family if you go through a catastrophic event and lose everything without some type of insurance. The best thing, I think, is promoting, let's look at the risk, let's see if we can get people away from those high-risk areas. But if you're not able to, I would say purchase the flood insurance, carry that at all times, because if you ever do need it, it's there to help you.
And just for a reminder, that's what it is. It's insurance, so we hope we don't ever need it, right? And it's required under what circumstances?
If you purchase, whether it's a residential structure or a commercial business under a federally backed mortgage, say like for a house, a 30-year mortgage, the bank is going to make a requirement that you carry flood insurance. Unfortunately, for some families that have paid off their mortgage, they feel like it's okay to drop the flood insurance, and we see that happen way too often. And I just really strongly feel that if that's the first step in protecting yourself is to carry flood insurance.
Great advice. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for being here today, Randall, and to our student crew who's working so hard behind the scenes, and all of our viewers for watching. We're going to start something kind of new here on Consider This, and we are going to feature a student. We're going to take a look at some video shot by that student, and today we're going to close with a trip to Omaha's Henry Dorley Zoo and Aquarium as seen through the lens of Chris White, a senior right here at UNO. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at netnebraska.org/Consider This. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu. Support for Consider This is provided by
There's a new place for senior care, a place with flexible meal plans and 24-hour room service. A place where seniors get the care they need in the comfort of home. Home Instead Senior Care.